Let's just jump right in, Ankur. I want to talk to you about this episode with Joe.
Tell me. Bare your heart to me.
Good. Well, here's I'm going to do this because I always do this because I like to just point out to you what I think you're up to because I'm not sure if you know. But when I sense there's a through line, I think it's worth just maybe kind of teasing that out. And for me, I noticed a lot of similarities right away with the Harrison Gardner episode. Were you aware of anything like
Nope.
that?
Not at all.
Okay, so would you humor me as I
Yes. Tell me.
unpack that? So one of the big takeaways that I got from this episode with Joe is this idea of kind of liberating music from the grips of the experts.
Yes. Oh, okay. Now I see where you're going. Nice.
Music to the people, music for the people. And so much that we took out of the Harry episode, I think, together, what I walked away from certainly was like how building can become a primal skill. It is a primal skill, and how, not all of us are going to be expert builders, but all of us can participate in the act of building, and especially how that relates to our own space and environment.
Oh yeah. I'm loving this. It's like 10,000 heroes. It's like 10,000 builders, 10,000 musicians.
10,000 musicians, exactly. And so I would like to start there. And because I think that seems to be a through line in a lot of your conversations. I remember actually making the same observation in the Harrison episode, that there's something kind of core to Ankur's curiosity of just, what is that line? Because there is a line there. It's like our friend Matt spends all these thousands of hours practicing the guitar.
Mm-hmm.
And we want people like that, right? We certainly want to be playing music with people like that, because it elevates the level of expression, what we're able to communicate.
Yes.
And at the same time, there's something about this collective, this wonderful funk collective. Maybe actually we take a little more time during this conversation that you could tell the listener a little bit more about that band you and Joe are in. But there's something so wonderful about that. That's just like this invitation kind of opening up to all levels of expression.
Yeah. I mean, and here's the thing. Like, let's say again, like I'm always looking for like the deepest wisdom, like the perennial philosophy. And that usually means integration of things that seem like opposites. So on one pole, we have like fetishism of expertise. It's like the best people are like, I'm going to just say Yo-Yo Ma, because I don't know much about this stuff, but like an amazing cellist, right? And who's practiced ostensibly thousands of hours. And those are the people we want to hear. And those are the people that are on Spotify. And if I want to hear a flute player, like I'm learning to play the Indian classical flute, I'm not going to hear on Spotify a flute player who's at my level. I'm going to hear Hari Prasad Chaurasia, like the best flute player who I've ever heard of. And I'm going to be like, wow, that is totally inspiring. That's totally amazing. So that's one side. And those people have gone deep into the cave and practiced for decades. And the other side is what Joe is highlighting, because Joe's not criticizing anything about practicing. He's an incredible musician who's clearly practiced a ton. But he's like, hey, why do they have to be any barriers for people to play and record and produce and share music? And it's more fun. He actually doesn't like playing. I mean, he doesn't dislike it, but he doesn't want to play covers. He wants to play original music, and not just his, but he wants to play songs that I write and that people he knows writes, just to like get more expression and more voices. It's like the real 10,000 heroes, like democratizing songwriting concept. So for me, the integration of those two things is, practicing is a spiritual path. It's how we achieve excellence. It's how we're able to express everything that could come up inside us. Yeah, we want to do that, but let that not be a barrier. Don't like the invitation is like, share wherever you're at, express whatever you can express right now. And then sure, keep practicing, and then you'll be able to express more. But so many of us have this thing of like, oh, I'm not going to share. I'm not going to do anything until I'm perfect, or I'm not going to do it until I'm an expert. And I feel like that's what Harry and Joe are both saying. Harry, there's this like safety side, of course. Joe, it's a little bit less so. But like, don't let that be a barrier. Like, we can each learn to express ourselves in a way and have this creative relationship with either the built environment or the sonic environment. And we don't have to wait 10,000 hours before we do that.
So you ask these wonderful questions of your guests, of our guests, and you get these wonderful answers, but they're not always the answers to your questions. And sometimes in these debriefs, I like to give you the opportunity to maybe fill in the blanks, some of the questions you ask. So I think one thing that we didn't necessarily close the loop on is, what do we get by having more people that are on the other side of that barrier? What do we get as a society, or what do we get as a community by having more voices heard?
Yeah. So my initial impression is that we get pride and enthusiasm. So the same pride. I mean, and it's hilarious. It's not rational. So little of what we do is rational. But like, somebody is on Spotify, and you listen to them, and you're stoked, and you're like, hey, dude, check out this awesome song my friend's on Spotify. Where it's not like you need to have any bar of quality or listenership to be on Spotify. Like, you just pay some hosting company, then you're on there. It's not actually a sign of any kind of merit. But we're stoked about that. Like, you're stoked when you have a friend who's like, oh yeah, I just released this thing, because it's you're part of their success. So I think that's part of this like kind of sense of what's the word? Extra personal or kind of collective pride. Like, not pride about what you did, but pride about what your friends did. And then the sense of enthusiasm of like, yeah, like we can do that. We're here. We're showing up. We're expressing ourselves. We're part of the beauty. It's like participation as opposed to just being a consumer. And just a little anecdote about that. For a couple of years ago, when my daughter was, I think, 2 or 3, we were just listening to a ton of music that our friends had produced, like my songs, Joe's songs, like many other people's, Matt's songs, Mimu, just like we were just doing a lot of recording at that time. And so then anytime she would hear a song on the radio, she would be like, which one of our friends did that song? This total sense of possibility of like, oh yeah, music is something that we all do.
So there's 2 things. Yeah, no, it's really, of course, our listeners don't have the pleasure of knowing Jasmine, your daughter, but that sentence coming out of her mouth just brings a little extra joy to the whole conversation for me personally. Maybe we can include a picture or a little video of Jasmine in the show notes somehow. So a couple things that I'd like to respond with. I mean, the first thing is I'd like to respond to that anecdote with an anecdote that it reminds me of, is that my grandfather was a huge classical music fan. Beethoven and Mozart in particular. And he would make us mixtapes, like literal cassettes, mixtapes. And he would send them in the mail of these like Mozart's hottest hits of, whenever. And then the tape would come in the mail, or sometimes it would be, I think, also he was a fan of opera and Pavarotti. So sometimes, we get these mixtapes, and my mom would say, oh, hey, Grandpa made us another tape. And then we play in this like Pavarotti or something, like German opera or something. And I just always thought it was my grandfather singing. I thought my grandfather was this like he was a genius. And in my eyes, he was one of my heroes. But it just added this like whole extra dimension to that, because he was a lover of music. And it's just, it's interesting because you don't think of like classical mixtapes. You think of mixtapes often. That's not the first thing you think of. But for him, it was like just a total pastime. The other thing I wanted to take us, maybe kind of veer us off in another direction, or sort of just steelman the other side of this a little bit. And I'll do one of my famous Nathan Ramos misattributing a quote, and we can correct it in the show notes maybe. But I think it's Artaud, who said, I would that our craft was a tightrope where, and I'm paraphrasing now, the incompetent would not dare tread. And I think that reflects a certain viewpoint that artists have that also maybe has some validity. And, I'll kind of point towards like reality television, some of the places in culture and art where it seems like there's been sort of a diminishing of quality or seriousness. And I wonder if you could help me sort of reconcile those two things. Tell me if you think this too, that this, what Arto is saying is getting at something that's also important. There's certain like gatekeepers of a craft or an art form or a lineage or a tradition that feels so important too, that we want to like preserve those elements of tradition, even while we're sort of deconstructing and maybe taking down the gates and, opening up the floodgates of the people, let the people all come into these sort of gated palaces.
Okay. I think I felt that way in the past. I can't really relate to that right now. So let me just ask you, or ask us both. 10,000 heroes trying to create a generation of people more connected to their deepest selves, more able to express themselves through contributing to the world around them, and then have this evolution of consciousness. That's part of the mission. How does that help if the craft becomes a tightrope and more people somehow internally have this block? They're like, oh, I'm not even going to try, because there's no external block. There's no there's no police. There's no art police. It's like, you can't be a painter because you're painting shitty. So how does that help that people feel just blocked or like unwilling to do something unless they're going to dedicate X years to it? What is the benefit of that for us?
I'm not going to answer that question because it's hard and I don't have an answer. So I'm going to ask a different question. Or I'm going to maybe just trace this a little bit further with you, because I think this is very interesting for me, and is a question that I have. I don't know that does help us reach that goal. So, but I do think, and I'll point this out, like this is something we talk a lot about through Momentum Lab, right? This idea of 10,000 heroes comes out of, it's an outgrowth of the work we're doing with our coaching clients and wanting to empower people to be very, elevated by their purpose, by their pursuit of purpose and their intention and attention to that week to week. Does that sound about right? Yeah. And one of the things I think that we've identified as something that can help with are people have sort of lost that conventional lattice work. For better, we think, right? In the same way that the kind of gates are open and there's no tightrope. But there were some structures that were associated with some of those conventional ways. And I want to give an example now, because I've been having some discussions with a friend of mine, who's very involved with, I won't say the institution, but one of the more prestigious institutions in, one of the more prestigious academies for arts and professional training in the States. And this is an issue that she's identified on campus, because when you go to, I went to I had a fine arts training in acting. I went to a acting conservatory. And when you're in a conservatory, when you're in the academy, there is that certain standard, right? They're cutting people every semester, right? You're kind of on this, you're almost on a game show. It's like at the end of every quarter, someone's going to get cut. That it creates this like very competitive environment. And there's a lot to be gained from that, right? The work ethic is very high. The standard is very high. I'm sure you are familiar with something like that at Stanford in your education. And that type of sort of, that I would say that's like the old school sort of conservatory training. And for fine artists, they would go to these fine arts programs and they would just get shredded by their professors and just torn apart. And that was actually, there was something in that kind of stimulated an artist that kind of was holding this tightrope, right? And was like holding this standard of craft. Well, like obviously, or not, maybe not obviously, but there's been a huge shift of culture on college campuses over the last decades. And that style of training is just not acceptable, right? Like everybody on campus now needs to be trauma informed. They need to be aware of the triggers of different students. There's all of this diversity that needs to be like brought in. And, all these advances of like of pluralism and letting in more voices, and has kind of taken those professors and that style of teaching and kind of gutted it or at least, or maybe, you know, has kind of stripped it of its power and its authority.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's so
Poor
sad.
Poor patriarchy.
Whoa, are the old school asshole art professors? I'm so sorry.
But the thing she's expressing now is like there's sort of a gap now because there's not the framework and the accountability structures that were there before. And I think this is like consistent with a lot of college campuses where the students have risen up and created dialogues that are like, you know, hey, we're demanding this. We're demanding you talk to us this way and that you respect us and that, you know, we have this participation in the conversation. But then there's maybe some of the loss of that structure that was there before, that framework and that lineage that created an accountability. It created a framework for people to pursue this path, pursue something that's like, I am a professional cellist. I have a belonging to a group, and you know, it makes me feel special. It makes me feel there's a passion to pursue there, and then there's that lineage there that's holding that person up and pushing them to be their best. You know, did I go a long way to get to nothing, or does that make sense to you?
That's kind of how I feel. No, I don't have much sympathy for that. So here's the thing. The way I see it, there's just like infinite options now. You know, you can like you said, the floodgates are open. I think you can still seek out, if you want the old school, if you want to have like corporal punishment in your music school, you could probably still find that. You know, like, you know, you heard the Deepak Ram episode, you know, he's going like living in a slum with his teacher and having to practice like X hours a day. And that experience is available. Sure. This like fancy art school, you can't find it there anymore. That does not trouble me at all. Like people who want to have a hardcore experience of like a patriarchal master telling them the right thing to do for 20 years, which personally I think is incredibly valuable, they can have that. You know, and and it's kind of like a weird market system thing where if like these schools want to change their audience, or they're like, oh, we want paying students. These students want a different thing. They're going to capitulate. They're going to flow with that. I don't see any issue with that. I don't think there's going to be any dearth of like hard ass professionals.
Right. Or experts. We're not going to be lacking the experts just by empowering the masses.
We're just going to have a lot of like soft art students. They're like, I don't think that's going to hurt anything. You know, like big deal. Just like you could have, just like with the Spotify example, we have like the best, you know, presumably, I don't know if the best, but we have an incredibly high quality tier of musicians on there that if you want to be blown away by any instrument, you can be. And we have a bunch of people that suck. And that's great. I think that's fine. Because it's not like you can't find you can't find Miles Davis because you have a bunch of amateur jazz musicians on Spotify. Of course you can. So to me, it's like, it's a big tent and it's only
benefit. We can only win by giving more people access and putting instruments in more hands.
Yeah. And there's winning in different ways, right? Like it's the reason that it's winning to have just totally earth-shatteringly expert musicians on these platforms is because it's good for community. It's good for helping people connect with each other. It's good for a sense of pride and possibility and self-expression and creativity. It's great. And then these other people, like I listen to other music that's just like the absolute best in its field, to feel a sense of awe and inspiration and like, wow, I don't think I can do that at this point in my life, but I'm going to be able to benefit from it. So I think there's dangers on both sides if you don't have the other side, but there's like, we can integrate. Having
both sides, and then also maybe there needs to be some type of conversation between the sides. You know, I'm aware of, you know, certain people, certain like scientists kind of have this position of like, you know, during the pandemic is like, this is the science. If you're not a scientist, you don't know, shut the fuck up and let the experts deal with this because the stakes are that high. And then you have this whole other like kind of rising of everyone else, that says, no, we might not know, and we might not have the training, we might not have the background to read the studies coherently or really understand the data that we're looking at. But we have a voice, and we want to feel that voice, and we want to be recognized for having that voice. And we want a platform for that voice. So I'm not pressing you to have an answer on this, but I do think it's interesting, like that this kind of dialogue between experts and the masses is really relevant right now in a way that I don't know that the answer is just simple of just like, hand the keys over to the everybody.
Yeah. I mean, to me, that's very, very different. Like I'm talking about with Harry or Joe, we're talking about creative self-expression and a feeling of like empowerment in relation to your environment. There's like nothing about facts. There's nothing about objective truth. It's not like any song is right or any architectural pattern is right, although it might be safe or unsafe.
There's certain engineering principles that
it's a little bit different,
should be observed.
But it's just like, in terms of whether or not you put the electrical line like in the wall or outside in a sort of conduit, or whether it's made out of plastic or made out of copper, that kind of stuff it's aesthetic. Where the example you give about COVID it's not aesthetic. And I'm not saying that I'm not coming down on the side that like no one can talk about it, but there are like very different consequences and concerns. It's like, sure, anyone could just say, everyone does just share their opinion about everything.
All the time. But they never stop.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's like,
and there's almost no one that doesn't.
That's the world we've created.
And that's the world. Okay.
That's the world we've created.
Yeah.
But I think that has very different consequences than, just, okay. Here's
if everyone was, say, like everyone was singing their opinion then, like if we were just like kind of living in a musical, yes. This would be better for you.
God, it'd be so much better for me. So here's what I'm looking for. Like, I'm interested in connection and community and joy as a way of like giving us the inspiration to head towards the better world that we're going to create. I don't know that everybody sharing their opinion about COVID leads to that. It certainly seems like it's not leading to community, certainly where I live, where my local county health officer received death threats as a result of like a mask mandate. So it's there's like a disconnect there. Especially when you throw out the notion of objective facts and everyone's they're just venting, like this is, here's what I want. I want all of that emotional energy that's coming out as opinion to come out more like honestly or authentically as emotion. Like my basic approach here is that we share our opinions because there's an implicit like need or a request. We want to be heard. We have something to share. We have some feeling about something. But then we translate it into this like pseudo-rational language about whether or not masks or vaccines or health or whatever the hell it is. But the point is that there's like a real emotional experience that probably has nothing to do with those issues that we cloak it in, that I want people to feel heard about. And I don't know that this is like, I'm saying I honestly don't know that Twitter or blogs or whatever are the right way for that. I mean, maybe they are. But it's just, I think that comes from having like real connection with other human beings that care about you. Maybe that happens over Twitter. Maybe that happens in your kitchen. I don't know. But that's like that's how I translate what's going on.
Thank you for that. Interesting moment in which we find ourselves. Either way, like however you stand on it, there's something to solve here in terms of getting people to discuss. And having that discussion kind of produce better outcomes for themselves, for their communities, have more connection, have more channels for free expression, these emotions and ideas too. So interesting point. And I don't think there's any easy answer. I mean, I don't know. Either of us have like propositions for how to get there. What I think so interesting about the Joe interview is when you ask him this question, kind of towards the end of the interview, of your standard Ankur question of what's one thing that a listener could take away and apply immediately and experience some type of transformation. And he sings this song, which to me kind of sums up sort of all the songs from the space opera, because the space opera, at least as I understand the voice of the person singing, is this like perspective from like the other side of it. And so he sings this song. He says, or actually, I think even leading into the song, he says, just, whatever you're going through, just picture the other side of it. Just picture the other side of whatever that is, And so I wonder if you're willing to do that with me or for me in regards to this issue. This kind of mass sort of communication difficulty that we're maybe kind of stuck in now, and how these pathways to expression, like what you're saying, is emotion, but I think it could be even broader and deeper than that. It's also like maybe expressing your vision for life and creative ideas you might have about how community can manifest. But what does it look like on the other side when we've solved those obstacles? Let's say that everybody is singing through the streets. Is that one feature of that reality? We'd kind of all be living our life in song.
That's a fantastic question. Think about it for a second. I think the other side of that, well, one thing I'm sure about is it does not involve censorship. Because censorship, like prohibition, it's great. It's kind of a great idea, but it just doesn't work. So, unfortunately, that's just not tenable. Like so many great ideas, it's just like, yeah, that'd be nice, but that's not going to work. So I think what it involves is an actual awareness on the part of our species that we are, each one of us, in every moment, having an emotional experience, just as we are having a physical experience. And that when we communicate, oftentimes we think we're communicating for one reason, as in like to convey information or to get information. But we're able to discern on the other side of this, at that point in our evolution, like when what our actual need is to have an emotional experience, to share our emotions or to receive support for our emotions. And we're able to just clearly separate those things. And so much of the societal or the political conversation that really is just wounding and pain in disguise as like thoughts on policy can just disappear. And the thoughts on policy can be like what it should be, which is essentially rational and like trying to understand and agree on metrics and targets, and like these are the goals which we don't agree on, so that in itself is a difficult conversation of like, what do we actually want as society? And then the policies are just tools to achieve our common goals at the intersection of our goals. But that whole other layer of emotional needs is met through a much more propitious domain and strategy, which is connecting with other humans as humans. And so the sphere of public discourse, in a way, it becomes much smaller because it's people actually talking about issues without being triggered. And people, because we have emotional experiences and we're being triggered almost all the time, we can discuss that in a very like clear and intentional way with people that care about us.
You guys touched on nonviolent communication just a bit.
Yeah.
I think that's actually something that you share with Joe. Sounded
yes.
like
yeah.
He introduced you to nonviolent communication.
Tip of the hat to Uncle Marshall Rosenberg.
Marshall Rosenberg. And just so we like actually tip our hat, maybe we can provide a link in the show notes. But how can you say a little more? You said a little bit in the episode, but How, and I know that you're a fan of this modality, you're a practitioner, you're trained, and you offer it a lot to our clients. And I've seen to great result. So how do you think, like, what aspects of nonviolent communication, or maybe just some of the core ethics of it, could lead us to that reality that you're speaking about?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's certainly relevant, but the key feature is awareness. Just like awareness of like, what is my experience right now? And there's many different modalities that point us in that direction. Like a lot of the physical work that you do, like the Feldenkrais work and, the attention to movement. Is that what you call it? Awareness through movement. I think it's got the same thing. It's just like the whole point is to bring awareness to what is happening in this whole entity here, the mind, body, spirit, emotion entity. And to have it like expand in its complexity and dimensionality, and like fully comprehend, like, I'm not just a dude walking around trying to get things done or trying to hit my deadlines. I actually have other things going on. I have physical pain. I have, mental stress. I have some resentment about something. And the more we can be aware of what's going on, the less it's just going to infuse all of our interactions. Like everyone has the experience of going to work and your boss is being a total dick to you. And it's nothing has changed since yesterday in your life or your performance or your relationship. But it's like that person, almost got sideswiped by a car on their way to work, and they're just freaked out and they're in this state of like panic. And of course, it's going to come out in every single relationship, and they're going to be mean to the barista or whatever the hell is going on. It's just the more we can bring awareness to that, the less all of our relationships, both intrapersonal, how we relate to ourselves, and interpersonal, how we relate to others, can be cleansed of it. We can use that energy appropriately to learn and to grow and not just like to have it be unintentionally like polluting everything else.
That's beautiful, Ankur. Really, thank you. I'm glad we took the time to kind of, I hope the listener got as much out of it.
Yeah, we don't normally do this. So
this is really great. Yeah. I really appreciate that perspective a lot. And I think maybe I can kind of wind down this conversation now by shouting out Uncle Victor. It's not the first time we've referred to this TED Talk. This is kind of like, and any opportunity I think that we can refer back to this Victor Wooten TED Talk, like just the better. The more people listen to that TED Talk, I think we'll just have, we could just probably shortcut our mission by just publishing that everywhere where people can see it. So this Victor Wooten TED Talk, I think so much we've said today and so much you talked about with Joe is really the kind of a fundamental thing that he's communicating in that lecture about music. And I'll just give the brief, but we'll put the link again because we recommend everyone listen to this as many times as they can. But what Victor is communicating about music as a language, and him coming into music, into a musical family where it wasn't, he didn't get music theory. He wasn't told that he's doing it wrong. It wasn't that there was, you got to do it like this. They just put an instrument in his hand. And the instrument didn't even make noise at first. He just got to play with this thing and be part of what was happening. And if we can put more instruments in people's hands so they can just take part in the conversation. It sounds like what you're saying, what Joe's saying is that we're on the path to a better place, a better world, more of a shared experience with each other. And I think Victor Wooten calls it, on the battlefield of love. He's kind of out there on the front lines and he's inviting us to run out there with him. Thank you so much for bringing this space opera to our podcast. I think this was definitely a first that a guest basically sang his responses to all your questions.
I love it. I wish it could be every time.
Yeah, no, as we heard in this conversation, you wish your whole life could just be like that at Starbucks. You just like sing your order. We'd sing your name when it was ready. It'd be great. Thank you all so much to our audience. Thank you guys for listening to this conversation and all the episodes that you've tuned in for. We really appreciate your attention. We have a survey out right now, and we'd love for you to take it. Check it out. You can visit that link in the show notes. You can also follow us on Twitter at 10KH Show. And send us an email with anything that is on your mind after listening to any of these conversations. We'd just love to hear from you. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We'll talk to you next time.